All right, my BIBLEin365 brothers and sisters, we have arrived at one of the most important books of the Bible when it relates to a whole bunch of issues, and that is the book of 1 Kings. Now, it's one of the most important books of the Bible because of the history of Israel. It's one of the most important books of the Bible because of the practicality of how to rule and how to lead as a nation. It's one of the most important books of the Bible because it teaches us so much about our personal lives and even things like our personal finances. It's one of the most important books of the Bible because it gives us great insight as into human nature and how human nature can destroy everything in front of you if not regulated and governed by the Lord. It is one of the most important books of the Bible because of the remarkable insight that we gain on how to live practically every day. So let's get into this because it's really important. 1 Kings literally covers about 120-year period that starts with the reign of Solomon and actually ends with Ahaziah's reign. So we're talking about 971 BC and, of course, all the way into 851 BC. Now, the critical date that we have to remember here, especially because of the significance of the history of the nation of Israel, would be 931 BC. Now, here's the reason why that's a critical date. It's a critical date because this is the year that King Solomon dies. And when King Solomon dies, his son, Rehoboam, takes control of the kingdom. Now, when Rehoboam takes control of the kingdom, there is a fella from the north. His name is Jeroboam, and he goes representing 10 tribes from the northern region of Israel. They're still a unified nation, Rehoboam being the last king to rule a unified nation. Rehoboam is approached by Jeroboam, and Jeroboam says, "Man, your dad was too hard on us. He taxed us all the time. He was really difficult with us. Just ease up on us a little bit and everything will be great." So, of course, Rehoboam goes to the advisors of the wisest king in the world, the men he should have listened to, and he says, "What do I do about this?" And they say, give him a little bit of slack. If you give him a little bit of slack, everything will still be fine. Remember, Rehoboam inherited the largest amount of wealth ever brought in by anybody in human history. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. Yet it wasn't enough. So Jeroboam was told, let these people go a little bit, cut them loose, and they'll be loyal to you forever. And of course, he didn't like that counsel, so he went to his younger, more idiotic friends that said, "Hey, what should we do about this?" And they said, "Oh yeah, man, just be way harder on those guys, man. If you do this, if you do what the old folks are telling you to do, you're going to show them that you're weak." So what does Jeroboam do? When he goes back to Rehoboam, Rehoboam takes the advice of this insane group of young people, and Rehoboam tells Jeroboam, "If you think my dad was tough, I got more toughness in my pinky than my dad had in his whole waist. So it's going to get way harder on you." Jeroboam says, "Thanks, but no thanks," and leads a rebellion against the southern kingdom. And it is in the year 931 BC when we see the split of the nation of Israel. We have 10 tribes to the north and 1 tribe to the south. And of course, the first king of the northern kingdom would be Jeroboam. And of course, the first king of the southern kingdom, as it is split, is going to be Rehoboam. Now, understand this, the legitimacy of the nation of Israel as a kingdom was always predicated upon the existence of the southern kingdom, which is why when the southern kingdom was destroyed later on in 586 BC, then we saw, in essence, what we understood and perceived to be as the annihilation of the state of Israel in ancient times until we actually saw a rebirth of the state of Israel a little bit later as we got into the post-exilic period. And then when all of that ended because of the Roman Empire, then we saw it again in 1948. So very, very interesting stuff. Huge, huge area to be studying in 1 Kings because of what happened historically speaking. Now, I want to also point this out because it's really critical. It also gives us great insight into the government and how the government even works today and how the God of this world, Satan, continues to inspire government leaders. When you look at wokeism and you look at everything that happened with wokeism, you can learn so much from what Jeroboam did when they split from the southern kingdom. Think about it like this. Jeroboam recognized, and we learned this from 1 Kings, Jeroboam recognized that he had a serious problem. And that serious problem was that people that were in in the north still had to go to the temple in the southern kingdom. And when they would go to the temple in the southern kingdom and they would worship the Lord in the temple, they all of a sudden would get homesick and they would say, my allegiance really should be with the southern kingdom. And so in essence, it created a lot of conflict. So what did Jeroboam do in his political genius, which of course was satanically inspired? He said, I need to be able to get people to worship in the north so that they never go to the south to try to worship. But he knew that the people would never go and worship in the north, no matter how convenient it was, because it was not what God's law had prescribed. So he knew what he needed to do was enlist the influential power of the priests who were serving in the southern kingdom. And so he took a bunch of priests, he incentivized doing what they did by giving them a whole bunch of money and getting them to think that it was the better thing. And he set up all of these things that the Bible referred to as the high places, these areas where people would come to worship in the north. And the key here was let the priests operate, that they knew the priests that worked in the southern kingdom, let them operate in the high places. Because remember, the southern kingdom priests, all they had to do was work for 2 weeks out of the year. And then the rest of the time they would go and they would live their life doing other things. So in the free time, it gave the high priests, or not the high priests, it gave the regular priests a side hustle, and they went and they did exactly what Jeroboam wanted to do in the northern kingdom. Now that meant that people would go and they would worship in these high places. By the way, they were called high places because they were put at the highest point of the city. And depending on what city it was, they would find the hill that's the highest point. They would put these temples there, made up or erected to false gods, and then the priests would run it. And that's why they were called the high places. So Jeroboam told everybody, hey, you can come worship here. It's just as effective. It is just as legal. Look, these are the priests that you've known always from the southern kingdom. And so the people would look at that and they would go, oh yeah, we trust these guys. These are our priests. So they would bow down and they would worship. And of course, in doing so, this is where we saw lots of things like sexual things that had developed as a result of their pagan practices. This is where abortion became a big deal. And isn't it interesting that if you study that well and you understand it, that it takes you to the modern day when you begin to think about people like Margaret Sanger and her Negro Project. If you remember, she said that she was going to actually create Planned Parenthood for the sole purpose of the elimination of the black race. And she knew that she could do it through abortion, but she knew that she would never be able to get black families to abort their babies because of how strong those societies were. So she knew the only way that she could get them to do that is if their pastors bought into the lie of abortion, and that's what she called the Negro Project. And isn't it interesting to think about today how successful the Negro Project has been? Think about it like this. 3% of the childbearing population in this country are black women, yet they account for 50% of the abortions. And how about we look at one of the strongest supporters of abortion today is actually Raphael Warnock, who is the black pastor of a black church that used to be the Church of Martin Luther King Jr. So think about the kind of power that Satan's work has had. What happened in the time of Jeroboam is the same thing that's happening today, where the priests were taken advantage of by Jeroboam to actually exploit the people. The same thing, of course, has happened right here with Margaret Sanger, and it's a tool that's used to get people away from building strong families and serving the God of heaven. We learn all of that from 1 Kings. Oh, by the way, one of the most powerful aspects of 1 Kings is given to you in understanding the life of Solomon. Did you know that you, just by observing the life of Solomon, can get the wisdom that you need to produce wealth for your family, to be able to secure your family's well-being from generation to generation to generation to generation? And I know people will say, oh, James is a health and wealth pastor. No, I'm not. But I will tell you that God desires for us to secure our families in ways that money becomes a tool. And when you learn to treat money as a tool and you amass it in large amounts to do God's purposes, you'll also learn something very different from the health and wealth preachers that are out there, the Benny Hinn's and the crazy Joel Osteen nonsense. The big difference is this: if you do it the devil's way, then you learn the habits that these health and wealth preachers are teaching you. If you do it God's way, you learn the habits that King Solomon exemplifies. And not only do you do that, but you learn something very critical. You learn that it's never about loving the money and using the people. You begin to realize it's about loving God and loving the people and using the money. And the king of Israel, who ruled with the greatest wisdom any ruler ever had, can teach us so much about building wealth for our families and using that wealth to glorify the God of heaven. So much stuff here in 1 Kings. By the way, there's so many other things that you can learn about in 1 Kings. For example, there are major events that we see given to us here in the book of 1 Kings. Of course, the major event of David's death. We learn about Solomon's reign. We learn about the division of the kingdom from the northern kingdom to the southern kingdom. And here's another major event that we look at, and that is the ministry of Elijah. And there's so much to learn over there. And there is so many powerful things that we can gain from it. Once again, a reminder, when you go through the first 11 chapters, you get through the life of Solomon. You also get through a unified kingdom. When you get into chapter 12, you're in a divided kingdom all the way through 22. And there is so much to learn. And I can tell you this right now, it will be one of the most incredible books you study. It is a book that I have studied forever and ever and ever, and I'm still caught up in so much of what I take home every day. It's a great book, folks. You're going to love it. Keep serving the Lord. And by the way, congratulations, you're doing a great job with the Bible reading. God bless you.